Welcome back. If you didn't already know, life is just another task analysis. We're wrapping up chapter 3 and we're on page 59. We're going to talk about what Cooper says about prioritizing and assessing the social significance of potential target behaviors. So this is where you're going to start to look at what you want to increase or what you want to decrease during your authorization period. This can look different for a number of different populations. So for example, if you're working with littles, you have a lot of more hours to work with, right? And the reason this is possible is because as the behavior analyst, you're going to supervise a team of registered behavior technicians in order to implement your programs. Now, if you're working with adults, for example, in a Medicaid waiver program, and we're talking about HCS, which is Home Community and Support Services, you would train direct staff, but they're not going to have these authorized units, right, to just do behavior support. So they have to do their actual job, right? So for example, if you're in a group home, they still have to cook, they still have to do laundry, they still have to bathe and feed some of these individuals that reside in the group home. And then on top of that, they're expected to implement the treatment plan. So you can see how the effort, right, for the staff in your group home to implement extra procedures and extra things that they don't get a raise for would be very different than your team of RBTs who literally get paid to implement all of these behavior intervention programs that you created. So your first step is, how do I determine, knowing these situations, right? Because you have to take into consideration what the individual wants, if they're able to provide any sort of input regarding their behavior support plan. So maybe not with a little, but in a teenager and adult, definitely. You want to see how this behavior is going to make their lives easier for them. How is this going to help them? How is this going to help their direct family members or their teacher or their employer, depending on where these behaviors are occurring and what we want to achieve through these behavior modifications, behavior interventions, behavior plan, behavior treatment. Different phrases and wording, but essentially the same, okay? So as a behavior analyst, we have a little cheat sheet. You should, if you don't already, highly encourage you to buy your copy of Cooper 3rd edition. I still refer to it. There's no way I could remember all of this all the time in my head. There's a lot of stuff that I have to do, okay? So no harm in going back and looking at it. But we're going to break down figure 3.7, which is a worksheet for evaluating the social significance of potential target behaviors. Notice it says potential, not the actual ones. This is just a guideline. It's just going to point you in the right direction. It's essentially your brainstorming, right? So when you were in school and you're like, oh, let's do brainstorming. What do I want to write about? What things go in here, right? So you've got your big bubble where you're brainstorming all these different possible target behaviors. And then this is going to help you to just slide off the table all the ones that really aren't going to benefit your patient or your client. So first question, is this going to reinforce your client in the future after services end? Yes or no? If it's not, then forget about it. Is this behavior necessary prerequisite for a more complex and functional skill? If it is, then we definitely need to target that because there's no way to get to that more advanced skill. Will this behavior increase the client's access to new environments where other important behaviors can be acquired and used? So if we're talking about a little, is this going to help them succeed in school? If we're talking about a teenager, is this going to help them succeed in a friendship or a relationship? If we're talking about an adult, is this going to get them out of the most restrictive environment? So will this be able to get them into a job? Will this be able to get them into a group home? Maybe they're institutionalized or not. Maybe they're in the state supported living center. So these are the things you want to take into consideration. And the ones that say yes, hold on to those. We're going to keep those in our bubble. Will changing the behavior predispose others to interact with your client in a more appropriate and supportive manner? Is this going to help their circle of friends, increase the number of staff members that will want to work directly with them in a group home or the day hub or in the center? Is this going to increase the number of family members that will be willing to socialize with them and interact with them, right? Because maybe they have an aunt or uncle who absolutely adores them, but they have little kids, so they can't go visit because if they bring their little kids, it's a safety hazard, okay? So these things are things that you need to keep in mind, right? Because what we don't want is for this individual to have absolutely no type of friendship, family relationship, or professional relationship in their life. Everyone needs some kind of social interaction to succeed, just like we all need some kind of physical movement to get through life. So is this behavior a pivotal behavior or a behavioral cusp? Okay, so when we're talking about movement, right, if the individual is not able to push themselves in the wheelchair, the number of reinforcers and interactions that he or she are going to be able to contact is going to be very small. So if they're able to learn how to independently maneuver the wheelchair, then that opens the door to a number of other different possibilities that they would be able to do. Pivotal behavior would open up the door to untrained new behaviors. So a big one of my favorite right now is PECS, because I have seen my littles fly through PECS from phase 1 to phase 6. But interestingly enough, there's one that was just starting, was in phase 2, and he independently started making sentences. Was like, hold on, I want you to open the door and get the rocket for me. So not only did he know that the rocket was not in the treatment room, but he knew that he had to request for them to open the door for him to gain access to the rocket in clinic. That was not taught to him. That is a pivotal behavior. Is this behavior even age appropriate? For example, age appropriate to teach a 55-year-old male who engages in severe SIB because of his OCD to learn how to tie his shoes when the shoes or anything that he wears is not a trigger in any way, shape, or form. Now, you can answer that on your own, but if you say yes, we can't be friends, okay? I'm sorry, but you got other stuff that you need to focus on as a behavior analyst, and it's not teaching him how to tie his shoes. Does this target behavior actually have anything to do with the behavior you're trying to increase or decrease? For example, if you are teaching potty training and all you're focused on is washing hands, not that washing hands is not a good goal to target, but if your goal, right, let's say you have an 8-year-old in a pull-up and you're trying to get them to go to the bathroom, and instead of focusing on a task analysis, increasing, tolerating, going to the bathroom, sitting on the toilet, flushing, wiping, etc., you are focusing on washing hands before even getting started on the bathroom, and you spend all of your time and effort on washing hands, that's not going to help with the actual problem of wearing a pull-up, Okay, so just make sure that you don't get lost in targeting indirect behaviors. Is this just talk, or are we actually doing some kind of behavior reduction or increase in behavior? So when you work with adults, for example, if you have somebody who engages in self-injurious behavior in order to gain attention, and they're talking to you about how, oh, I know that it's bad and I'm not going to cut myself anymore, and I know that it's not good for me and it's not healthy. They're just what? It's all talk, right? You can't count that as the behavior. What you need are things that are measurable and observable that you can manipulate variables in order to increase or decrease for them to eventually stop in the SIB, which is your long-term goal. What if it's not an actual specific behavior that your client wants, such as wanting to find a life partner? So this is a very common one in the adult population. If they're able to hold a conversation with me 9 out of 10 times, they talk about how they want to get married, they want to have a family, they want to move out of their home and move in with their significant other, but there is no significant other. So you don't just shut that down. You as a behavior analyst have to determine, okay, what skills do we need to work on? Are they able to have a conversation with somebody else? Are they able to be nice to somebody else? Do they know the characteristics of a good friend? Do they know that from friendship? Then you can move on to dating, right? And then what is safe dating behavior? So we have a long-term goal, but then as a behavior analyst, you would have to chop that down into smaller, attainable targets based on specific behavior to help your client. So now that you have your list of all of your potential target behaviors, now we're going to prioritize them from most important to least important, because at the end of the day, your client has restricted time, resources, and you're not gonna just be able to do behavior supports 24/7, right? You also have a life. It's not like you're gonna be able to move in with a client and just be working with them 24/7 to knock everything out. So this is important. You need to talk to the client if they're able to communicate with you. If not, you need to talk to direct care staff. You need to talk to parents or the legal guardian, whatever the case may be for your specific client, so that you can get input from everybody who interacts with your client on a daily basis to determine which one of these goals is going to make it into your behavior support plan for this authorization period, okay? It's not a race. You have to include mastery criteria. When you are increasing a skill, it takes time and practice, right? So just like when I learned how to play the violin when I started, I was horrible and it sounded like screeching. And then 3 years later, I could play really complicated pieces and I sounded great. But that didn't just happen overnight. It was time, effort, and a whole bunch of learning opportunities. So my behavior changed. This is exactly what we're doing with our clients. When we pick these goals, we are wanting to make sure we do long-term and short-term goals, where your short-term goal would be mastered within the authorization period. So how can you be successful as a behavior analyst so that your clients meet mastery criteria for not all, but at least 60 to 80% of the goals that are in the behavior support plan? Well, you need to have great definitions. And by great definitions, I mean follow what Cooper says. Measurable, observable. Can your 5 different RBTs that get rotated through your client run the program exactly the same way? If not, guess what? You need to break it down even further. It's not impossible, but this is literally your job. Those notes you write for the protocol modification, those clinical notes that you send to the state for the Medicaid waiver programs, all of those need to show that you're actually manipulating variables. And as long as you have socially valid goals, right, which you would determine based off all those questions we did when we were putting them in the pool and then prioritizing, and as long as your client comes first and you collaborate with the people that are more important to them or in their lives that are helping them, you will continue to make progress until they're able to graduate from services. So that's it for chapter 3. Next time, when I come back, we are going to start chapter 4, which is measuring behavior. Hope this was helpful. See you all later.